You're going to do it all the way through like that?
Like what?
Well, you haven't got nothing on the top of you, have you?
It's not like I'm a flasher rather than anything else. Okay.
Season
not that
12
one.
was when it all took a wrong turn.
Hi guys, welcome to another edition of Talking About Who. This week we are talking about the first Tom Baker season, season 12, which a few of you might be Blu-raying with this week, or if you're like Jason, you might be watching on Laserdisc. I'm P-Bal, and this week, as ever, I am joined by...
Hi, it's James.
And hi, it's Jason, not watching it on Laserdisc.
No, not watching it. No. On
I
VHS.
do watch them. I don't care what people say. I do watch them. James, I am loving, again, the background. You're almost, I blinked there and I thought I almost had Tom Baker there.
But Jason has got terrible cataracts, so we should all be mindful of that.
Yes, I am wearing my glasses this week, so...
I'm not, so I can't see anything. But anyway, as a like, subscribe, put your comments below, say nice things. And we're going to kick off with the first story, which is Doctor Who and the Giant Robot.
Oh, I wish it had been called the Giant Robot. I really do.
But it's not giant all the way, is it?
No.
Well, it's not exactly a small robot, though, is it?
Well, Doctor Who and the Not Exactly Small Robot might be a better title, but... So, okay, well then, Jason, let's see what your thoughts are on the Big Metal Man.
Well, I don't think it would have been the catchiest of titles. No, I agree, for an opening story. However, a very solid opening story for me. And Tom Baker, of course, coming in, our wonderful Tom Baker coming in as the Doctor. And actually, it's an Earth-based story for me that wouldn't have been out of place in the Pertwee era. So I think it's kind of good that we... You've got to see what I can see.
Sorry, it's an Earth-based story for me.
Yeah.
Who's it not an Earth-based story for?
I said it's an Earth-based story that would not have been out of place for me in the Pertwee era. And it's kind of nice that what we do is we come into this fourth Doctor, which is a turning point in Who history. And we've still got that sort of Earth-based while we're getting used to a zany new Doctor, which is kind of good.
Yeah, I must admit, I got that as well. It's the continuity, you're in safe hands, it's Unit and Sarah Jane. So I do like that fact. And you almost retread a little bit of Pertwee's first story where he's a bit disorientated and, you know, you've got the Unit family around him. So there's a nice link of continuity before the rest of the season, which takes you off in a completely different direction.
Tom's quite quickly. I mean, the mad thing with him is it's a few, and then he's on it. He's straight off. There's it's a sort of thing that bugs me later on, because obviously, I suppose in those days, regeneration was just changing the actor. Whereas it sort of builds into a myth later on, and then it becomes a thing, and it becomes a plot thing. You get dirges like Castrovalva, where it's just weeks of it, just about the fact he's regenerated. Whereas the Robot is the story isn't about him changing, and that bit is sort of bam, he's on it. He has his crazy, I'm going to dress like a clown or a Viking or whatever. But then it's on. It's the story. It doesn't hold the story back. And if anything, actually, while he's doing that, Sarah Jane's off carrying it herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a very fast start. I mean, there's that little bit of business where he's changing costumes and deciding on what he wants to be, and then obviously we get the fabulous scarf, which for me is one of the iconic Doctor Who just one of the most iconic things about Doctor Who for me. And very quickly then you're into the story. The energy's there right from the get-go. I mean, it was almost like Tom was born to play the Doctor. I am a huge Tom Baker fan. I make no secret of the fact. And I think, to cast somebody he was known but not very well known if you look at it. So, coming after John Pertwee, they were big shoes to fill, because John had brought the series through the early 70s. He was a very commanding figure, played the Doctor very, very well. And the shoes that Tom had to fill would have been worrying for any actor coming in, except for probably Tom, because he just had that confidence to be able to just carry this off. And it was literally, on the rewatch, 10 minutes in, and you forget this is a regeneration story. You're straight into the heart of it, and off you go. He is a genius.
He's got a very commanding performance. He's got great screen presence. You're right, he gets into that role very quickly. I think I prefer Tom in the early days to the later, more manic stories where he's, I don't know, he's ad-libbing or he's just making some of the bits up. But
whoa. Are we talking season 17 here? Are we on the 16-17 hate here?
No, not hate, but I just say the performance of the Doctor in this, I feel is I prefer. I'm getting the finger of doom from
you are getting the finger of. This is like Dimensions in Time all over again. This is.
But I mean, away from Tom's performance, you've got this storyline which is something like. Well, people describe it as being like King Kong, and I think it's like King Kong meets James Bond. So you've got this robot that ends up with this sort of relationship with Sarah. He accidentally kills his own maker and then sort of wants to protect Sarah. But then you've got this other plot about them trying to steal nuclear codes, to force the world's leaders to do what they want. So you've got this kind of plots going on, which are enjoyable. I think for his first episode, it's a nice soft landing, if you like. It's nothing too complex. The storyline just ticks along quite nicely, like you say. It's quite fast paced. You've got familiar characters in there, so you've got the unit team. It's a nice first go.
And it's interesting to see the transition post regeneration then, because Liz as Sarah Jane had established herself very much as obviously a companion under John, and they'd had a season together, and actually the chemistry was working quite well between them. So it's always a gamble for any series like this to change the lead actor, but to keep the sort of second lead or the other lead in the story the same. So it's unusual to get a transition of companions, because if you go back to the War Games, all the companions leave at the end and Pat becomes John. It was something that could have worked or might not have worked. And I think it's entirely down to the casting of Liz into the role anyway. But Sarah Jane as a character absolutely blossoms with Tom in this first season. And you can already see that sort of, that spark is already between them with it in this story. It takes another story just to settle in, but it's genius to have kept the Sarah Jane Doctor sort of companion team together, whilst you add to it with obviously Ian Marta, but it could have gone wrong. It didn't go wrong.
Do you think that's at the cost though of Harry's character? Because I do agree with you, and that we'll talk about it in later episodes. The relationship between Sarah Jane and the Doctor grows and grows and grows, to the point where the just lovely relationship. But sometimes I feel that Harry misses out a bit. Harry's like the tag along person. For me, in some of the scenes, it's kind of like, oh, and Harry's here.
I suppose I likened it the other day, actually, when we were watching, to it's a bit like the New Avengers, isn't it? I think with the New Avengers, you have Patrick Meany, who is the Doctor figure, and Joanne Lumley is the sort of feisty assistant, and Gareth Tennant's sort of there to hit people, and he doesn't quite have he's sort of just a bit more physical than Patrick is, but then Patrick's not unable to be fit, and that's obviously what he's there for, isn't he? The gist was it could have been an old man playing Doctor Who, and they'd need someone to run around. So Harry sort of hasn't quite got. They haven't thought where he would go if that wasn't what his function was, and so he's sort of just a bit there. And And there's also different stories. It does feel that sometimes they treat him as if he is a complete imbecile and shouldn't be there, and other times he's worth being there and he's not. It doesn't. There's not a huge consistency, I would say, throughout the stories. And I think especially when it comes back to revenge at the end, it's back to, oh, he's a moron, what's he here for? And it's kind of like you haven't got, and that's not about Ian's portrayal of it. Ian as Harry is incredible throughout. It's written, I think, so inconsistently, and it's such a sort of it's a thankless part that I think he does a really good job in.
Because in many respects, whilst the trio, I think it's great to have a trio in the TARDIS. The Doctor and Sarah Jane was really all that it needed. Now, again, I'm not casting aspersions on Ian Marter's sort of portrayal of Harry, because I think he did really, really well. He played into the part really well. But I think it didn't need a third companion. It needed that sort of Dr. Sarah Jane combination that had been established during the last John Pertwee season to just carry on and let that develop. And so you're right, the writers do have a problem in the sort of the stories that follow. They have a problem in establishing Harry's character fully. Is either one or the other, from a point of view of either, like I said, the hero of the piece or actually the klutz of the piece. Some would see that as character development, but I don't think it was. I think they just didn't quite know how to handle it.
And they often split them up. It's like the beginning of the story, they're always split up, so that even though they are this trio, you don't necessarily see that bonding so much with Harry and the Doctor. And then there are scenes where the Doctor sort of bumps into Sarah or rescues Sarah. So I find, again, I'd like to see more of the three of them together and see what that dynamic works like, rather than the two companions on their own without the Doctor, or all three of them split up.
It so needed an inside TARDIS scene, though, at the end of episode 4, where they go into the TARDIS and take off. It so needed something in there so we could get a bit of Harry reaction inside the TARDIS. Wouldn't you agree?
We get the ADR, don't we, and the suites. That's quite nice. I quite like that. I know what you just want TARDIS scenes. That's what that is. That's not Harry's reaction. You just want the TARDIS scene, don't you?
I do want the TARDIS scenes, because we were devoid of TARDIS scenes in this season. In fact, we were devoid of the TARDIS for quite some stories as well.
We'll go into that on the next story, but
I think the coming back to the Harry situation, I think it also, with UNIT as well, I think you instantly realise Tom's Doctor, he's not a UNIT Doctor. It's not to say that his scenes with Nick are great. There's that lovely one, isn't there, where Nick says, "Oh, we're the only ones that could be trusted with," and he goes, "Well, because they're all foreign." And it's these little wry things that you get, and Nick plays them brilliantly. But you can sort of see that the Fourth Doctor's not I'm going to be a scientific advisor and this is how the story. It's the character's slightly too big for it in some ways, and already it feels like UNIT's a sort of third party in the story. It's there, but you could imagine he'd probably have done it all without them anyway.
I agree. And although he goes back to UNIT, it's never quite the same. It's not like the Pertwee era where it's a constant companion. It starts to become the odd story rather than every story.
But it's the final closing out now, isn't it, of the sort of early 70s. You've got a lot of behind the scenes changes going on. This, for example, was John Levine's final regular appearance as Benton, and the UNIT phased down. Because you're right, I don't think this Doctor needed it. And I also think that it was the right time to take the show in a different direction. And it was right to almost detach away from that sort of staple of the John Pertwee era. And you just see it happening within a story. You've gone from it being almost, earthbound, whilst they weren't quite as much in season 11, but the shift in one story into a completely different track of storytelling for Tom is very obvious.
Yeah.
Story specifically, shifting away from the broad theme thing. lots of things to like individually, but Patricia Maynard steals it, I think, a little bit as Hilda.
Oh, she does. Absolutely.
It's a bit gutting that she doesn't come back for a second go with it. She gives it the full. And again, we sort of discussed there's a lot about villain performances, and she's on the right scale of it. I mean, you wouldn't do that performance in, I don't know, Brookside, but you can do it in Doctor, and it's great, and it really works for it. A nice double act with Alec Linstead. That's all, and Edward Burnham doing his crazy professor. He's got the crazy professor hair. He's on that.
But everything you expect a crazy professor to be, though, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I think it looks. I like the fact that it's all video. So I think this part of me sometimes doesn't like that switch between location film and sometimes I just think it doesn't. If it's all on one thing, it's great. But we do have I suppose the elephant in the room with this is it's the tank. Is that a Corgi model I spy? Is that a real tank? It ain't no real tank.
Or is it the bar? Is it a Barbie doll or something? When you do the shot of the robots,
or is it a Dennis Fisher doll, Jason?
Oh,
it could well be. I don't think Dennis Fisher brought a tank out, but as I'm sure you can see, they bring a TARDIS out. Chris Barry did what he could, I suppose, with a limited budget for the story. But yeah, there are a couple of obvious bits, especially when the robot grows. I mean, again, you've got to look past it, but that effect is particularly ropey, isn't it?
For me, it's the glass effect. When the robot's looking at Sarah, and it just reminds me of my nan's front door. You remember those old glass front doors, which was sort of like crazy glass? And it shattered everything. That's what it looks like. Someone's looking through an old front door at Sarah.
Also, you kind of have to wonder what's the robot taking from having such bad vision? Surely it should be a clear vision with like computer programs and lights around the person, rather than a kind of security glass.
Well, that's the next special release on Super Blu-ray in the future. They'll clean up the effects of the robot, and it will be Super Terminator style.
Give it time. I'm sure if there's a buck to be made, they'll do it. I think it rolls along. It goes at the great. I think it's got a good pace to it. It's a Terrence Dicks, isn't it? He's very solid. He's not going to do something out the window. He's not. He will give you the 4 parts because he knows Doctor Who. He knows what you need to do.
He puts a very basic setup in. It's a bit whodunit. I agree. It's a little bit sort of James Bond and a bit sort of there's a few of the bits, but it's a basic underneath the surface of it. It's a basic whodunit, and you're kept waiting right the way up until the end, until the real sort of villains, if you like, a reveal. But he's got a way of telling a story. It's a very simple way, Terrence, and very much like a lot of his writing in the Target books. But it works, and as an opening story for a Doctor. This is actually it is a solid piece because, sometimes you can get lost in the narrative of trying to reinvent a new Doctor. And actually that was happening as the story was coming along. It wasn't jarring like some of the opening stories post a regeneration can be.
And, some of the ropey effects aside, I think the giant robot design itself is very iconic. It looks incredible. I think even now it looks great. Incredible as well that it's Michael Kilgareth in there having to move it all as well. I mean, it's quite something that it's a physical costume.
A health and safety nightmare, I feel that costume might well have been.
There is that moment, isn't there, when they're trying to get out there and Hilda, they go away in the van, and you can see they're sort of trying to guide him up the thing because the poor chap can't really. He's sort of doing that with his feet, sort of going along. But it's what that is. Are we heading towards a score on the door for Doctor Who and the Giant Robot? They're looking like they might have scores. I mean, to me, it's just dead air, and I look a bit foolish, but they look like they're ready.
No, I think we can run a score here. I feel.
Okay, so who am I going to first then?
Go on. I will go first. just so Jason can copy.
Just have it noted, I never copy your scores. I went
No.
first entirely through season 1. Which
To be
may or may
fair
not
to
be
our
out
regular viewers, you will spot this evening that I expect that Jason and I scores will be different. In summary for Robot, I think it's a safe start for Tom. I think it's familiar ground. We said James Bond versus King Kong. I'm stringing it out just for you, Jason. I just thought I'd give you time to do your mathematics. I scored it a solid, Jason, 7.
A solid 7.
Solid 7.
A solid 7.
A good start, a solid 7. I don't disagree with anything that James said. I'm going to give it a slightly more solid 7.5.
Ooh.
Oh, he's all about the change. It's all about the change, eh?
Mix it up. Mix it up.
In lieu of the three of us having such exciting, diverse opinions there, I think it's a great story. It rattles along at a great pace. It looks good. There's lots of low performances. It's not the greatest thing ever, but I think it's a cut above a lot of other things. So I'm also going to go for 7.5.
Yay!
Ooh, which gives Doctor Who Robot 22 points.
Well, that's a good, solid start.
Good, solid start indeed. And then we head off into space for the Ark in Space.
That isn't shaped like an arc at all. It's shaped like a donut.
But Noah's not really called Noah, so it's all future millennials being punny.
Oh.
It is. Virus. He's not really called Noah. We just, have a joke from people saying that 30,000 years ago. She's the first millennial in space.
I blame the Twitter generation.
She was only TikToking was Vira. She didn't even use Instagram. So who wants to start us off with the bubble wrap?
Well, indeed, the bubble wrap. And as a very impressionable 5-year-old at the time when this story was aired originally, yes, indeed, 5 years of age, gentlemen and ladies.
Were you cryogenically suspended as well?
For a few millennia.
Moisturizer, honey, it works a treat as moisturizer. As of an impressionable 5-year-old, I would never have picked up on the fact that it was bubble wrap, and the Wirren absolutely scared the bejesus out of me. They were big. I mean, obviously, you look at them today, and you can look past some of the sort of model making. I'll talk about that later. But the Wirren were quite a menacing looking thing. It's the story I grew up with, saying it's the story of the bubble wrap. But the whole premise of putting it on the space station, it's the last of mankind, it's the remains of humankind, they're at the mercy of the alien race, the Wirren. The set design for this story is absolutely stunning. And
it was so good they used it twice.
And so they should, because they spent a lot of money on it. It was quite
spent so much money.
But the set was so impressive. The story behind the story was very well written. And actually, it wasn't quite filmed in this order. So obviously it's not the second story that they produced. It's actually the fourth that they filmed, but it went out second. By this point, the regulars have really found their feet because they've done a couple of other bits of filming. But this is a very, very impressive story, and one that I very much like.
Oh, leave you hanging on that. It's interesting, I think, because the first part is it's almost because am I right thinking John Luke Rotti had original fingers in the pie writing this, and then it was not quite right for the series, and I wonder if that's where the shades of it come in, because it feels very Heartless, that kind of landing, but not almost Space Museum, I suppose. That thing of they land and there's a lot of dialogue with the regulars and a lot of the this is mysterious, what's happening kind of thing. And that's great, actually, because it does show everybody off, I think, really well. And Tom, as I say, Tom is completely in command there. He's owning it at this point.
Yeah, there's that fabulous. I think again the direction of this story, Rodney Bennett's direction is very, very sharp throughout the whole of the story. It's a studio bound, just basically because it's on the space station. But there's that scene in the cryo chamber, and the way that it's shot and the way that it's lit, and the fact that it's a double story set. It was, I hadn't seen anything quite like that in Doctor Who before, and I actually think it was just very, very impressive. And I think it sets a serious tone to what is actually quite a serious story.
I think you've got Hinchcliffe. This is his first story, isn't it? So you've got elements of horror that come into. I mean, the story itself. The fact that they've been, cryogenically frozen for so long. The Ruin have sort of sabotaged it and kept them in suspended animation. It's very alien-esque in the fact that they've laid eggs, inside the humans, the hatching out. There are elements of it that you look at it and you go, well, that's straight out of a film, straight out of Aliens, but straight out of a sci-fi film. It is quite dark. I didn't grow up with this story, so I this was before. Oh, sorry, I have to say it, before my time. So actually, for me, it was a bubble wrap monster. So I didn't see it through those 5. Was it 5? You said 5-year-old.
5, yes, indeed, 5, yes.
Okay. He's talking in dog years. You're all right.
So when I first saw this, which was on VHS release in the in the 90s, I believe, it was just, oh, that's a bit of a naff alien. But I appreciate that when you first saw it, it would have looked, quite impressive at that time. So I think there's, for me, production-wise, things like the bubble wrap on the hand, kind of a bit lame, but I do appreciate the story itself.
I'd say, I mean, because Kent, yeah, I'll take you there. I think no, because Kenton Moore are great. I mean, he's incredible performances, and I think even though he's got bubble wrap on his hand to signify that he's, I think that's fine.
It's a great performance.
His performance outweighs the fact that he's playing with bubble wrap, which again is a slight. At the time, it wasn't quite as much. You didn't get an Amazon parcel every day with a bit of Wirren in it. It was a bit more exotic, I suppose. It's difficult. I mean, I suppose on the other hand, you could go too far. If it was too far, too grotesque, and he was bubbling with something awful and green, would it be too much for an audience? The fact that he's actually, I mean, I suppose it's sort of parallels with later on with Seeds of Doom, isn't it? When they turn to crinoids and stuff. It's that sort of invasive body parasite thing, isn't it? No, but I think I felt it's a slight sort of 80s Who problem that you get, isn't it? In that the brightness and the space age of the Ark, lovely, but when the Wirren costumes are a bit kind of, they look a bit crap in the full light. Down in pipe work in the darkness, it's a bit more forgivable. But when they're sort of jabbering their 6 mandibles all sort of at the same, it's a bit kind of, I don't know whether I find the Wirren aesthetically pleasing.
I mean, John Friedlander's design is ambitious, and it is ambitious, and it's actually, when you look at it from a piece of design, they are well done. The problem you've got is budget, and I think the problem you've got is that they didn't have somebody inside them, so they literally were, they were cumbersome costumes. It goes back, if you think about the Web Planet, the Zarbi costumes are just impossible for the actors to wear, and again, the Wirren costumes do a very similar thing, and they're not that easy for anybody to manhandle around. They're a bit too big, and in all fairness, you'd be doing it differently in today's world. But the scale of what they're trying to achieve for me is very ambitious.
And going back to what you were just saying, Paul, about if it was something other than bubble wrap, that it might be too grotesque or too scary. There is actually a scene that's been removed from this, which is where Noah begs to be killed. And they actually cut that from the broadcast version because it was deemed to be too horrible to watch.
And on the monitor behind him was just a little clip of the Reign of Terror.
I would have been begging to be killed.
But nothing to do with the Wirren.
Screen.
Nothing to do with the Wirren. It was the missing parts of the Reign of Terror. Just, no, don't bring them back.
They found them. No, they found them. No.
It is. I mean, it's. I mean, I suppose that's the resolution of it at the end, isn't it? Even though he's been, turned into a Wirren, it is his humanity that sort of saves the day overall, isn't it? The other, I mean, another outstanding. Wendy Williams is outstanding in this, and all the way through, it's a very measured performance, a very calm performance, and it's got a lot of spice, a lot of layers to it, and she also matches Tom, and you can see Tom isn't moving with it. He's not oppressing her. She's in the line there, and they're sort of as equals, and maybe there's a little bit of chemistry there, but. And she gets the last shot, doesn't she? She gives a very sort of, I don't know, sassy last shot, doesn't she? When she has her bag of sweets and all. I like that, and it's a shame she didn't do another story really, because it's a great performance, I think. They're in awe of my Wendy Williams love, not the American talk show host. I mean the one in the Ark in Space.
I have a little factoid for you. So the first...
Hang on, we didn't have a factoid for the robots.
No, I mean, Stato, I'm feeling a bit robbed here.
I don't, it's not for every story.
Oh.
The title sequence on episode 1 was tinted green as an experiment. And then they scrapped it. There we go.
Was it tinted with the green they used on the bubble wrap?
Yeah. They had some paint left over.
I wonder if they were going to tint it a different colour for every story thereafter.
Who knows?
Well,
for the colour of the alien.
Theme tints. Maybe for future releases they could do options where you could watch with a different tinted intro.
There we go. They've missed a trick on the Blu-ray.
I can't wait for the Super Blu-ray release for this season, because we've already offered many opportunities here for extras.
I want a whole 4 episodes of robots seen through that glass.
Oh wow!
We'll just go look through Clifford's front door.
To watch it through someone's window. The other thing I was gonna ask you, what do you think? Because this is the first of the stories where the TARDIS goes. So they land in the TARDIS, and then we have various different methods of transportation to the next story. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it was kind of supposed to be a story arc, arc in space, or was it just they can be bothered to rebuild the TARDIS on the next set?
To be honest, I think the story arc, it was obviously planned in some way for it to be there. But strangely, it's interesting that I've never really considered it a story arc, because yes, they do bounce about a bit, but it's almost like this comes back to, I think what Paul said earlier, which is around that sort of Hartnell-esque thing. So there's possibly a bit of John Lucarotti still in here, but they get separated from the TARDIS. And that makes it a little bit, and I hadn't relied on the TARDIS a lot in many respects for the last few years, so losing it wasn't really a big loss to the stories. Just another way of transporting them to wherever they needed to be, put a bit more menace into it possibly. I don't see it as an arc as such, even though we now look at it in retrospect as such. I just think it was a great plot device just to get them from A to B without bringing the TARDIS out every week, like you said.
I think, the TARDIS not being in it sort of is hither nor thither really with me. I'm not too bothered. I mean, you obviously get the thing at the end where it just turns up and it's very well timed and all that. The arc, the story arc, not the arc or Doctor Who in the Ark in Space, any of that. The story arc, I find it's all right if you watch the Ark in Space, but then I think the subsequent stories where it's meant to slightly link to throw up a few questions for me that I sort of think, I don't think that makes sense as an ongoing thing. I mean, yeah, there are a few sort of leaps or bounds that you've got to take with it, that if you don't question it, it's all right. I suppose the fact that they've overslept by however many thousand years, and so he says this isn't really work. This transmat thing isn't really working. I'd better take the transmat down to repair it. It's like, so you're taking the transmat that doesn't work to Earth to repair it. Whereas I suppose if they got this, it made more sense in that instance. I suppose we said your transmat's not working, love. I'm going to nip in the TARDIS and I'll fix it from the ground. But we're not taking the TARDIS prop to Dartmoor. Sod that.
That's probably what it was all about.
But, yeah, you can have the robot or you can have the TARDIS. Which one do you need for the plot? Oh, we'll take the robot. It's a bit crap, but we'll take it.
All they can fit on the back of the van, just the robot, not the TARDIS.
We've jumped a time skip here. We're in the next story.
We have, but the next story, this one was filmed as a 6-parter, but then you do have this cut off into a 2-parter, because originally it was a 6-part block.
Yeah, well, Bob Holmes was not a fan of 6-part stories. He's on record as not being a fan of them, and he had a big reluctance because he felt, and I think it's a sentiment shared by us actually, that we find some 6-parters a little saggy in the middle, do we not? And that was the view, and that's why this story got split. So you had and the Ark in Space makes it it's a very tight 4-parter. There's not an awful lot of pad in the Ark in Space at all, and I think hiving it off and having that sort of 2-part story sitting out there as an extra piece to the end sort of is nice and clean and works very well in the basis and the construction of this season. I mean, we know this season was truncated. It was originally to end with the Terror of the Zygons, and that was moved and changed, so it only became a 20-week season. I think splitting it up and not having a 6-part is a great idea. I'm not a big fan of them, as you know. Yeah,
there is a lovely moment talking about Tom. His relationship with Elizabeth. As it grows. The scene where she's going through the tunnel. She's stuck in the pipe work, and he's just stood there going, "Oh, trust you. Oh, you're useless," like this, and you just hear her huffing and puffing as she tries to squeeze out. I love that scene because when she gets out and she's like, "Get off me," and he's just like, "I didn't mean it," and sort of gives her a cuddle, and they carry on. I love the relationship between the two of them. He knows exactly how to push her buttons, and just does it in such a nice way. That scene for me just really sort of sums up their relationship.
Yeah, no, it's nice bit of chemistry, nice bit of work, and obviously there's a little cheeky play on the having people crawling through air ducts and air vents and all that sort of, You get the Wirren going by, don't you? You get that little scuff.
Yeah.
They do have that motion, don't they, when the Wirrens go by? Like chuckling. So, are we heading to a score on Doctor Who and the Ark in Space?
Yes.
A story that Mr. Martin must have enjoyed because he novelised it, didn't he?
He did. Yes, actually. And actually his Target contributions were always extremely good. So another good story. I'll go first with the score on this one then, I think.
I'll just go and get my knitting.
Just to mix this up, and it gives you a chance to go for a break. No, I'm kidding. I'm scoring this story on the basis that I think the story is really, really, really strong. I think the visualization of the sets is really good. Yes, okay, it's bubble wrap. Yes, okay, the Wirren themselves aren't necessarily as threatening in adult life as they were when I was a 5-year-old, but I have a real passion for this story, and it's his classics an often overused word, but I think this is borderline very solid, almost into that sort of classic, and I think again there's probably a soft spot for me, as it was a very very well-remembered story from my youth. I also love the line, by the way, I forgot to mention, around Madame Nostradamus having knitted the scarf, which I think is a lovely little touch. So all things being equal for this story, I'm going to go for a very, very solid 9.
A very solid 9. I've overslept by 5,000 years whilst you were giving that score.
We've gone back to the Nerva beacon.
Oh, it's all right. The transmat doesn't work. I'll see you in 10. Okay, James, where are you at on the arc in space?
So I don't have the nostalgia. To me, it was bubble wrap and dodgy aliens when I first watched it. However, I do appreciate the story itself and what it was trying to achieve doesn't quite hit the mark for me, but it is still good story. So I gave it a 7.
7 points. Drum roll. Yeah, do you know what? I'm sort of, it's interesting because I do think it's a very good story, and I do think there's lots in it to like, and there's a lot of elements that I do enjoy about it. But sort of when I was thinking about it in context, and sort of it's difficult because quite often, I was talking about this with Dex the other day, you think of Doctor Who as a story, different stories. So if someone says, do you like the android invasion? You go, oh, yes, no, whatever. Or do you like Catch the Valve? You think of them as stories, and then when you watch them as seasons, it's such a different experience. There's a weird context that you sort of drummed out of yourself, especially if you like one story in a season and not another story. So I always thought that Arc was one of the better ones in the season, and yet I enjoyed Robot more. And I feel strange because I don't think Robot's necessarily better than the Arc in Space, but I enjoyed it more. So on that basis, before I turn into Jason, and that'd be what would that be? Baker into Davison. We are going to give Arc in Space 7 points.
Oh, okay.
I'm copying James's score now.
I feel as if I've been over generous, but I think my score for this is I think for me it is a 9.
But I think that when you grow up with stories, there's always an element that you feel more nostalgic to it, and there are episodes of Doctor Who that I'm sure we are going to talk about in the future, where you might go, oh, not really sure about, and I'll be like, that's the one I watched when I was 5, or when I was a kid, that was the first one I saw, and I think it is of its time, and like I say, I think the story is great. I just think that it's let down by some of the visuals. But it was of its time.
Jason or the Ark in Space? Anyway,
well, it was such an impressive set. They used it again, so
we get to talk about it again.
We do
later on.
We'll just cut it back in. So Ark in Space finishes therefore with a drum roll, 23 points. Just edges the giant robot.
Edges the giant robot. Great. I'm pleased about that.
I'm sure I've seen that video. The next one, we head to Dartmoor. We're going on location for a fortnight. Woo! And it is the Sontaran experiment. I always want to say Sontaran. I know it's totally not that. Sontaran experiment. So who wants to kick us off on this little ditty?
Go on then. I'll start, because we've just been talking about the fact that this was originally going to be 6 parts, and so what you get is the last 4 episodes were all studio based, and then you get these 2 episodes which are completely location based, and there's a real difference in the feel of them. It's quite violent. It's quite there are some real scenes in this where the 2 guys have got the weight above the other one, and there's he's turning the weight up, and it's basically about to crush him. For a Doctor Who story, there's some quite dark moments, and again you're starting to see that the sort of Hinchcliffe influence come over the storylines. This Tom hurt his collarbone when he was shooting this, so there is the epic fight scene between the Doctor and the Sontaran isn't actually the Doctor, but then I read today it wasn't actually the Sontaran either, because he couldn't move around in the suit. So actually, you've got two people, and I made a note of their names, because you've got Terry Walsh, who stood in for Tom, and then Stuart Fell, who stood in for Kevin Lindsay as the Sontaran. So the big fight isn't actually the two characters at all.
Two stunt stalwarts there.
Yeah. So it is interesting, and I knew that from previously. So when I was rewatching this, I was like, can I spot the bits where it's just, a bloke in a wig? Some of the Roger Moore later films where you just know it's not Roger Moore that's doing any of the action shots. It's just someone in his clothes. I was looking for that. That being said, it's not massively noticeable. You think what's going on. Again,
the big clue, I think, when Tom, if he's opposing, he has his scarf up like that, doesn't he, to cover the fact that his neck can't move, and he's sort of usually a bit perched in a kind of, I'm not going to move now because I've sort of broken my neck a little bit.
It's like this huge, great big fight sequence, and then you just see Tom just like this, just going, like. But it's quite difficult to judge a two story thing, because there's not a great deal that happens in the fact that the Sontaran's there. I think the robot in this one, I wrote down the cowboy robot because it just lassos everything. It just I mean, how they don't run away from it, I've got no idea, because it looks like I don't know what it looks like.
It does look like a sort of a squash smash thing, doesn't it? It's got the smash thing. Then with
the weird antennae. It looks. It doesn't look very scary or intimidating, but
designed for the terrain of Dartmoor, surely. Okay. Shipwrecked astronauts, alien experiments, the return of the Sontarans, all tucked up in a nice little two-part story that feels like they wanted a weekend in Devon, so off they all went to the North Devon coast. This story falls terribly flat for me, and I've talked about the Ark in Space being a story I grew up with. I can remember this story on transmission. I'm at that point where season 12 was probably the first year that I watched Doctor Who, and can remember quite a bit of it. But it feels like a filler two-part story to me, and I'm not a big fan of the Sontaran experiment.
You've been reading my notes. That was the first thing I wrote, was feels like a filler.
The interesting thing is, it shouldn't, should it? Because essentially, you've got 2 episodes. You are shooting it entirely on location. You could do something quite good with this, and they don't.
No.
It does feel like complete filler, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense either.
No, the script just doesn't. I don't know why, but the script doesn't deliver. I mean, you brought back the Sontaran, and the Sontaran clearly in the story because they'd been popular in the previous, or the first time that they'd been seen. So it was a case of, okay, let's reuse the monster, let's bring the Sontaran back. But there's very little threat, and I can't believe for one moment that one Sontaran, running these sort of experiments on 2 of what is left of these shipwrecked astronauts is in any way something that's got any grip to the story. Now, the Bristol boys write some good scripts, and they've done some very, very good stories over the time. But it just feels like they missed the point here, and it was an unusual tale. Didn't really feel Doctor Who-ish to me, and it just didn't deliver on the kind of level that I think something like the Ark in Space had in the previous story.
I didn't get the battle invasion were just waiting for him to do this experiment. It was kind of why?
His experiment proves that they can't lift heavy weights, and that they like
They're afraid
each
of
other.
snakes.
They're scared of of porridge and stuff. It's kind of like it isn't what exactly. And also he's stronger than any of them, and he's got better weaponry than any of them. So it doesn't. He should really work out within the first 5 minutes that actually I'm better than these guys, without having to, unless he's on some kind of expenses deal and he's like, do you know what, if I can drag this out, my report's almost ready. Don't do the invasion till I've done my report though, guys, because it's lovely up here in Dartmoor.
Yeah, I need to go to the pub tonight. I can get at least another 2 nights here on this visit and run those expenses up, no problem at all.
Like, yeah, I've got like 8 prisoners, 8 something like that. They've all got to be fed. Like no, I don't. And there's really odd because it obviously tries to link to the Ark, and then you have that thing. Well, you've got the Ark. How far out is the Ark then? Because they're like, oh, the Ark was lost. We never found that. It's a myth. Like, bloody hell, where is the Ark then? Where's it gone? And if you've been traveling around space and gone there and come back to Earth and all that, and you said it's been thousands of years of your civilization evolving, you've never spotted where the Ark is, even though the Ark's not meant to have driven. It's just well, what's that mean? What that makes no sense. So
why wouldn't have Major Steyer? Why would he have not gone to the Ark and done all these experiments on the people in the Ark?
Or just blown the Ark up and landed on the empty Earth.
Earth is empty, and they found a couple of stragglers, and they're like, "Oh, I don't think we will invade." Well, there's nobody there apart from these few sort of survivors.
Steyer is the worst estate agent ever. It's like, it's an abandoned planet. There's no one here. Oh, don't know. Maybe don't invade. There could be 6 people here that might have something that I can discover in my tests that could beat us. But if I was testing them, they beat me. Then what would be the point of this anyway?
Just need to see if I can fit a water feature into the garden, and then we can invade.
The planet is also empty, so there isn't anybody else on the planet. So surely they could just rock up to the planet. It's not. What do they need to test these things? It's, as I've said, I think the story misses a beat. It doesn't quite deliver. And if we talked about story arc in the last story, but if this was meant as part of a story arc, it doesn't work, and therefore it feels completely out of place. Great filming because they got out on location. Great that they've been able to go to somewhere desolate like Dartmoor. It acts really well, a bit like Snowdonia did for things like the Abominable Snowmen. It's always great when you can get out to a nice location, but it is really a case of it's all a little bit. It's all just a little bit show, because you might have a fabulous location, you might have some great actors there, but you haven't got very much of a story underpinning the whole thing. So therefore, it just feels like a wasted opportunity, and therefore a missed position of 2 episodes that I just don't think have. I just don't think they've got any gravitas about them.
No. If you want a good 2-parter with Sarah Jane and a Sontaran, watch the Sarah Jane Adventures: The Last Sontaran, because that's better than this.
Do they go to Dartmoor?
No, but he does crash in a forest.
See, I think I'd have to mark it down if it wasn't in Dartmoor, because I kind of like Dartmoor. It's a really nice place to visit. And you've also got to say that Kevin Lindsay came back and gave a great, Sontaran role again. I mean,
he died shortly afterwards, didn't he?
He did.
He had a heart condition.
It's very difficult for an actor to project themselves when they are so encased in a costume in the way that the Sontaran costume was back in the 70s. But he manages to give the Sontaran character a real character. So whilst I've dismissed the story as being a bit of a filler and what have you, if you look at the performances within there were some great performances. Glyn Jones, Donald Douglas, there were some great bits in this. But Kevin Lindsay's still shining in that Sontaran costume, and there is a real character coming through as part of it. So for me, it does help the score for me on the end of this, but I think again it just shows the the ability of the actor behind the mask here.
Yeah, I think we might have exhausted all points on this. Maybe yeah, I think two-parters are difficult. In some ways, you say a two-part is difficult because you feel it's not as long as a four-parter, and it's not. But nowadays, a two-parter is essentially the length of a Doctor Who story. You do it in 50 minutes, so it's not. It's slightly unusual then, but quite regular now. But two-parters traditionally, sort of in classic Who, always tend to be a bit sort of. They go for half the story rather than half the length. It feels like they sort of just colour them. So as the time draws, who wants to go first on Doctor Who and the Sontaran experiment?
Oh, go on then. I will go first. So sticking with our estate agents theme, I would describe this as a bijou. And I would give it a 5.
5 from James. What is Jason going to give the Sontaran experiment?
I'm not going to use any fancy combination of scoring mechanism here because I'm going to
There's 2 episodes.
Because it's 2 episodes, and then no. I think a missed opportunity, but some good performances, great location, a forgettable story in some aspects, but nevertheless, worth a score. It's not too low. So I'm the same as James, strangely. I went for a 5 also.
5 is the magic number. Yeah, I think I find it hard to hate anything that's Tom, Liz, Ian. Kevin's great in it. But it's just not very good. If you went straight, if you just skipped it, as I suspect a lot of people who had the video might have tried.
I remember doing that.
You see, I never use this. Is before I do this. This is one of the things for me with this story in a lot of ways, is that because I was, when this Genesis was repeated in 93, I was 11, somewhere in that vicinity. So pocket money was at premium, so I only got videos that I really hadn't got a copy of UK Gold, or I couldn't. So I taped Genesis weekly off BBC Two. So I had that. So there was no point in the world for me to pay £20 to have the Sontaran experiment. So I didn't have, maybe UK Gold was the first time I did have it, but so it's never had a sort of association with me. And then when I did finally see it, it was just like, oh, at least I didn't spend 20 quid on it. So we are on a controversial knife edge today, aren't we? Because I also scored the Sontaran experiment 5.
Well, I think that's the first time ever we've all scored the same score for a story.
No, we gave all 10s for the Daemons.
Oh, so we did. You're quite right. Yes, we did.
And we all gave 10s for Dimensions in Time, we must not forget.
In that alternative timeline that has been deleted.
That actually got lost in Cyber.
Lost in the Matrix.
The 2 episodes of the Reign of Terror that we haven't found.
Well, something needs to get lost, and I don't know if it's the Matrix. Right. Well, we're going to call a half-time point here now. So with 3 stories in, 2 to go. So come back and you can see part 2 of our review. So like, subscribe. We'll see you shortly.